A distinguished guest, Professor Jonathan Peters from City University of New York. He's an economist by training. I've known him for a long time, and he has very interesting work related to transportation on the economics aspects and basically pricing of transportation system. And today actually is going to talk about fun stuff, scooters and e-bikes. I don't know what exactly to talk about, but mainly is that the change the transportation system.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about today.
And I'll let him to say anything else.
Thanks so much. It's great here, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we go. My other colleagues are Dave King out of ASU, Arizona State, Cameron Gordon at the University of Canberra in Australia, and Nora Santiago at the Gini High Performance Computing Center. So I'm happy to be here today. I'm happy to answer any questions. Hopefully we'll have some interesting discussion about what's going on in transportation. And I was asking before we started, what is your field? Your field is transportation engineering. Most people here are transportation engineering. So what do you think you're going to be doing in 5 and 10 years? Because part of it is, are you going to build systems that you then force humans to use? Or are you trying to build a system that they want to use? Or do we have to change, are we actually changing what we're consuming? So today I'm going to talk to you about what do I know so far about transportation services in terms of household consumption? What are the households doing? And that's what's interesting about this right now is that the households apparently are changing. Okay, has everybody got that? So what's happening is people are living differently. And so the first question is, how much do we know about household spending on transportation services? Because, well, that's what you provide, right? You know, you're providing transportation services. And the other question is, why are we interested in tracking these streets? Anybody? What do we got? Well, because that dictates what we're going to do next. Let's see. Go ahead. No, that's that. Let's see. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to look at is what type of transportation services are growing, and then what are we spending our money on? Fees and taxes, right? And then things like, I'm a specialist in road pricing, as Chris Osbeck said. I do a lot of work in road pricing because road pricing is viewed by a lot of people as the solution to all our problems. Does everybody know this? If we just priced roads, yes or no, you would solve all the congestion problems. Am I right? Is that true or not? By the way, the data is against you right now. I'll tell you that right now, because the Port Authority banged up the tolls on the East River, on the crossings under the Hudson River, by about 50% or 75%, and demand got crushed by about 3%. So pricing is one of those things that's viewed by a lot of people as you know, the way we're going to solve our problems in the future. I'm going to talk to you today a lot about the different kinds of households and what they spend their resources on. And I'm going to talk about tolls, but also all sorts of other transportation fees. And then the other question is, how well do we understand how different types of households spend their money? Things like low-income households are important because of issues of social justice, right? We always like to know what the rich people are doing, yes or no, because it's interesting to see what their behavior is. Generational differences. How about differences between urban people and rural people? Okay, because these different households have different types. We just went through the election. Does everybody know that? Does everybody understand that the rural people in America apparently are living a different world than the urban people on the coasts? Yes? So we can look at their different consumption patterns. They are different, okay? So I want to take a look at that for you guys, okay? First of all, in the old days, we used, what's the main funding source that you guys are going to use to build transport in America today? What's the main source? Anybody know? What's the big gun? Nobody knows the big gun? Who? What? There it is, the gas tax. Fuel taxation has been the hallmark for about how long? Anybody know? Prior to about 1910, the source of funding for transportation. First of all, if you've gone back, there's a great history book in New Jersey. I don't know if you know this, but there's a great study of historic roads in New Jersey, which talks to you about the long history of funding of transportation infrastructure. So when you go back and look at the transportation infrastructure history, prior to 1910, there was a lot of tolls. And roads were viewed as a local problem. They weren't viewed as a state problem or a national problem, okay? Post-1910, the Good Roads, keep me honest, Count, because, you know, right, the Good Roads movement comes in and says, look, we need to build more roads. We need to come up with a source. I have a great reference from the state of New Jersey. They had a study in 1919 about what the heck they were going to do about cars in New Jersey, because the number of cars went from like 16,000 in 1906 to like 160,000. And they're like, oh my God, what are we going to do next? The gas tax has been the hallmark, has been the centerpiece of our funding mechanisms for the last 50 years, 75 years. But now we're thinking we might have to change to some other mechanism, not just a flat fee. By the way, where do you pay your gas tax?
And does anybody know that they paid? No, it's blended right into the price of gas, right? Other than if there's differences between states, where the people might go across the border to avoid the tax as much as they could. But generally, people have no clue what they, by the way, where does the money go? Good answer. That's a very good answer. It goes to DC. A piece of it goes to DC. That's correct. And then where's the rest of it? There's a state tax. There's typically a state tax. By the way, in New York State, how many taxes on gasoline for the state? I think there's about 4 of them. There's a petroleum business tax. There's what they call a gas tax. There's some other tank storage fee. There's all sorts of garbage. About 59 cents a gallon or something like that in New York City. New York Metro is the taxes on gasoline. 18.4 cents goes to the U.S. DOT. Has everybody got it? By the way, does anybody know who collects the gas tax? This is just a fun little aside. If you don't know anything about our funding sources, anybody who collects the gas tax for the feds? The answer is the IRS. On occasional Fridays, apparently, they collect it. Whatever they have. Okay, how many people pay the gas tax to the federal government in the United States? Anybody want to give me a number of people? How many people in the U.S., by the way, just so you get a little idea of what we're talking about? How many people live in the United States? About 320 million, something like that. Okay, 325 million. Okay, how many entities pay the federal gas tax? About 1,800. They collect it where? At the refinery. So like when you look at the list of gas taxpayers, it's like ExxonMobil Corporation, Houston, Texas. Lukoil Corporation, Dallas, Texas. Amerada Hess Corporation, Woodbridge, New Jersey. Everybody got it? So they collect the tax very efficiently. But the problem is people are changing what they do. And we're having more troubles about where we're going to get our fees. The other thing is that we're pricing stuff differently. Has everybody got this, right? We're using more types of different pricing on routes, pricing by mode of travel, yes, differentials in price between travel, but pricing based upon congestion, right? And also on geographic region. And a lot of this stuff, when you guys are doing your traffic planning, right, don't you need to know what people are going to do? Yes? If I price a route, is it going to change behavior? By the way, I'll give you a secret. Shh, I got a secret for you. There's what's called the Great Circle Route in New York City. Does everybody know this? If I come into New York City and I come in through Staten Island and then go over the Verrazano Bridge eastbound, and then I come around and go over the Brooklyn Bridge, and then I go out the Holland Tunnel. Anybody, what's the amount of tolls I pay? Does anybody know? No, I pay about $12, $8 on the Goethals Bridge or something coming into Staten Island. If I go the other way, it's about $38. So guess which way you travel? Got it? So things like this, when you change the pricing, you're going to change the behavior. And you should know this because if you're going to do any of this stuff, what happens to the users when you mess around with them. So we got things like tolls, road pricing, VMT. Anybody heard of VMT? You guys on VMT? What do you think about VMT? You guys are on it? Yes, great stuff. When you ask John Q. Public about VMT, anybody what? What's VMT? We all know what VMT is? What is VMT? How's it going to work? How's VMT going to work? Have you guys thought about it? How's VMT going to work? What's VMT? We know what it is, right? Vehicle miles traveled, which is we're going to charge you per mile you drive. Yes? Who's into this? All the greens running around the room are into this. So we say, we're going to stop people from driving cars by charging them more. Yes? By the way, a VMT charge is not just going to typically be a flat fee. It might be we charge you more in congested areas, right? Or we charge you to go into certain districts, like go into the downtown region. Yes? Right? How's it going to work? Anybody thought about it? You guys haven't thought about this? No? How's it going to work?
Well, usually it was on the gas. As much as cars were burning gas, were paying that tax.
What we're going to do is we're probably going to put a reader. I don't know. Have you heard anything about it? Are they going to have a reader in the cars, or it's going to be basically your ON. By the way, does your OnStar know where you go right now? Does your GPS know where you go? I can track your route all you want, right? You're going to have a recorder in your car, and then you're going to have every vehicle equipped with a recording device, good or bad. First of all, cheap or not? No, not going to be cheap. Probably $200, $300 a car. Secondly, it's probably going to have hacking problems. But this is what everybody thinks we're going to do. What's congestion charging? We know that, right? You guys all know that one, right? By the way, is that coming back or not? Is that coming back or not? Have you heard it, Ken? Are we gonna have a congestion charge in New York?
The governor is interested.
The governor's interested, and that's what we've been waiting for. We were waiting for someone who says, yes, I want to be excited about congestion charging. What is that? What we're going to do is we're going to impose a fee for traveling into Manhattan, and the general area was Manhattan south of 59th Street was going to be charged, okay? All these things are going to change behavior, probably, and new things on parking, yes? Charging for parking, Transportation network company. This is your Lyft and your Uber, right? Taxi cab usage, car share, and things like online shopping. And everybody says, well, that's not transportation. Yes or no? Is online shopping a transportation problem? Two things about it. What? What? Truck derivatives, local urban freight, right? We go urban freight, right? Is that our general name, right? What's the second problem? It destroys passenger trips. Does everybody got it? I don't go out to the store to buy stuff. Why? I just have it shipped to me, right? So that's one of those things. All right, so there's lots of things going on, and the question is, how can you track the stuff? How do you know what's happening to our society? So just for fun, this is tolling in the United States. If you didn't know what about road pricing or tolling, this is a map of tolling based on UST numbers. Now, you look at the bottom there, that's the annual expenditures. That's the total amount of money that's spent on tolling by area, okay? What do you notice about that? Hi, welcome to the team. Guess where you live? What? You live in Tollland up here in the Northeast, right? Everybody see the Northeast? Now, this is 2000. This is 2010. Anybody notice anything? By the way, same scaling. Got it? What I had to do was I had to change what? I had to add new blocks, which is the black box. That's $1.9 to $3.1 billion a year in tolling. You guys are sitting right now in the center of tolling in America. About 33 to 35% of the tolls in America are collected within about 20 miles of where we're standing right now. Okay? In the United States, we have an argument, by the count, and I can talk later on. We have an argument about how much it is. I think it's about $15 billion a year. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, probably in the range of $6 billion of it. Got it? Right here. So if tolling is going to work, what? This is the place. You notice, by the way, if I toggle back and forth, what? Most of the numbers went up, right, in terms of spending on road fees, right? Florida went up, Texas went up, California's, well, Texas is kind of crazy, man. They love tolling. They're all over the place. But now they've banned it again, so now they're back and forth. What do you think? Is it successful as a revenue source? Probably. Does it really affect the demand management? We'll keep an eye on it. But the reality is, when you charge people more to drive, where do they get the money? What?
Disposable income or other expenses.
Well, no, the answer is you have to crowd something else out, right? Either you don't save as much for retirement, or you cut back on your spending on like travel around the world, or maybe you cut back on the food that you eat. This is the area that gets really interesting because everybody says, we'll impose all these fees. And I'm like, well, how is it going to affect the households? And that's what I'm going to show you today, okay? If I can get this clicker to work. Okay, so if you wanted to study these problems, where could you go? The first one, most of you transport people have seen the NHTS, right? Have you heard of the NHTS? Have they seen it? The National Household Transportation Survey. Is that a good source of what I'm talking about? Well, it tells you about your trips, right? What's the problem? They don't collect the price. So we know what you did, but we don't know how much it cost you. Has everybody got it? So that's a nice source for a lot of information about travel, but it's not a very good source about what your households are spending their money on. The second one is the American Time Use Survey. Has anybody heard of that one? That's BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics does that. This studies what people do with their time. Useful if you guys are studying like things like commuting and stuff. It may help you understand how long people spend commuting. Because there's the actual price of the good, yes, what you pay, but also the amount of time that you spend consuming it, yes? So there's two dimensions to your consumption. It's the amount of time you spend as well as your actual price that you actually pay. Like the New York City subway is cheap relative to other forms of travel, but what? It's slow. It's slow. Bus is worse, yes? So even though they're cheap, they're slow. So households are making trade-offs between time and money, right? And we're going to see that as we look at the different households. I'll talk about the BLS in a second. The Regional Household Travel Surveys, right? Like NIMTIC runs a survey on households and all that stuff that may be useful. Agencies like the MTA or the Port Authority or transport agencies may collect data on travel behavior. Industry data, Ubers, scooters, bike share, I'm going to come back to this. What's the problem with that data typically for you and me? Anybody know? What's typically the problem? The typical problem is this. Uber's got it, but what? They don't want to share it. Why don't they want to share it? They consider it proprietary information. They consider it to be information that could be used by their competitor. Uber doesn't want to tell Lyft what it's doing. Why? Because then Lyft might do what it does. So they want to cut. They don't want to say what they're doing. So this is a challenge because the agencies or the planners, right? You're going to be the planners. You might not have the information about what's been happening in the industry, but that might be out there. Smartphone data. Anybody using smartphone data yet? That's coming, right? Has everybody seen that? AirSage data, stuff like that, where they're analyzing activity based upon smartphone data, and then also credit card data. Credit card companies know a tremendous amount about your consumption patterns, but again, it can be problematic to get it out for research purposes. So I'm going to show you one that's actually available for you to research and use, which is the BLS Consumer Expenditures Survey. Anybody ever heard of that? Anybody ever used it? Okay, it's publicly available. You guys can tap into it tomorrow. You could go look around and poke around. And I've been poking around in this data for about 5 years. So I haven't found all the stuff yet. So there's more in there to study. And I would recommend if you really want to study some of this stuff that it's not a bad place to start. So again, I showed this early on. What's this? On the left is birds. These are birds, and this is limes. Those are lime scooters, right? Where are these things? This is Tempe, Arizona. I was out there last week, and these things are all over the freaking place. Does anybody know how they work? They're electric, right? I was talking to Dave King, who's my other author, right? Dave, and I'm like, what the hell? How do they work, right? Are they solar powered, or what do they do? No, apparently in the evenings, people round these things up and take them home and plug them in. Is this true? I can't believe this. They apparently have like a place where they say it's a bird, so it has a nest, and somebody goes out at night and picks them up and brings them, either rides them home and then plugs them in and charges them overnight, and then if you get them back in place by 8 a.m. the next morning, you get a credit. All right, whatever. These things go 15 miles an hour. And they're riding on the sidewalks, like in the middle of pedestrians. And I watched two guys pulling a guy on a skateboard in the middle of it, like down the sidewalk with two guys on either side with a skateboard in the middle. This is an example of where the consumers are gone, yes? And you as regulators or planners, what? You better catch up, right? 2 years ago, there were no birds and no lime scooters out in Tempe. I didn't see anything like this. 2 years later, there were thousands of them all over the place, going everywhere. What do you do with this thing? By the way, you said it's probably illegal, right? Because it's a motorized vehicle and you're riding on the sidewalk. What are you going to do? What are you guys going to do with this? First of all, one solution is ban it, right? Say, no, we can't have these things to stop. But what's the problem? Anybody? What's the problem? Well, the households want it, yes? And if the households want, why are they using this? Is this something that people want? Apparently, yes, because there's 1,000 of them on the street and everybody's riding around on them. Is there anybody forcing them to be used? No, this is just a changing consumption pattern. Probably, and this is where it gets interesting, what were people doing before the birds? Were they riding a bike? Were they walking, right? It's the same thing we had discussion when we did City Bike in New York. You know, City Bike came in. It's the biggest bike share system in the country, right? Still the biggest bike share system in the country, am I right? Right? How many rides a day on City Bike right now? Something like 35,000 or something like that a day, right? Where did they come from? We're still sorting that out. They probably were crummy transit trips where they're a little too short for transit trips because, you know, like a transit trip's good if it's longer. Like I came from 33rd out here, you know, and I have to walk down to the station and I have to wait for the train and I get on the train, come back up. So there probably were bad transit trips, maybe substitute for bike share, and also maybe long walks. You know, like some trips are really long walks, but as a bike ride, hey, they're no big deal. I don't know where these people are coming from, but it probably came from bicycle. It might have come from auto use, right? We have to decide as planners whether or not this is good or bad, yes? And then think about how we're going to incorporate them. Do we need to have bike lanes here? Because these things are on the sidewalk, like running right between the pedestrians, you know? Like I was getting ready to do this, you know, like I'm big, I'm like 240. I'm like, yeah, let me block you, you know? You'd hit me, man, go for it. All right, so we're going to talk about examining prices and any sort of transportation costs. So a couple of the sources, if you want to think about how people can measure costs of operation, the producer price index for firms, industries, or the consumer price index. Most people know that, right? The inflation measures in the United States have different types of goods. The CPI is based on part on the survey I'm going to show you, which is the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditures Survey. And there's lots of types of transportation spending in the BLS Consumer Expenditure Survey. So what's really cool is you can examine what's actually happening in the households based on the BLS. So this is one of the first things I saw when I started looking around at the BLS data. The BLS data, you'll see this reported, like household spending on transportation, yes? It comes from the Consumer Expenditure Survey, and I'm going to talk to you about what the survey has in it and what it can tell us about how households are changing. So this is an example of what percentage of households, what percent spend more or less than average on transportation services. So we happen to be up in an area that was actually reported as being below average in cost, whereas LA and Seattle were above average cost, okay? So I'll talk to you about the limitations of the data, but I'll also talk to you about what it's starting to tell us. Okay, how does it actually work? What it is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics works with the US Census Bureau to do the Consumer Price Index, right? Which is a measure of inflation or the cost of goods and services in our society, right? To do that, they have to have what they call a representative basket of goods. So everybody got it? They have to know what the households spend their money on. And the way they do that is they take a sample. They take a sample of 6,000 to 7,000 households. Now, you don't have to do this as a researcher, because what? Because the Bureau of Labor Statistics is doing all this for you every year. Every year, they're doing multiple surveys, going out and interviewing these 6,000 households about their consumption behavior, okay? You get rotated in for 15 months. They ask you 5 times about what you spend your money on. Has everybody got it? Now, this is a kick-ass survey. Does everybody understand this? Okay, you can go out and just take a survey like on the street. That's no good. This sucker is designed to be a demographically representative survey of the United States. So if there are 10% of the people that live in the southeast United States, 10% of the people in the survey. If the United States is 23% Hispanic, the survey is 23% Hispanic. If there's supposed to be 1% high income, there's 1% high income in the survey. Has everybody got it? It's put together and carefully selected so that the survey is it's designed to be representative of the US households. So then you can slice and dice it. What I'm going to show you now is how you can slice and dice it to tell you about the US households in all different dimensions. Now, the BLS is building the Consumer Expenditure Survey for the purposes of building that CPI, right? So they put together a basket of goods. What's my spin? Why do they even bother to talk to me? They're not specialists in transportation. So everybody got it? So I show up and I'm thinking about all the things we think about on a daily basis. I'm thinking about the birds. I'm thinking about road pricing. So the people at the BLS are like, oh yeah, they didn't think about all these things. Uber, Lyft, this is our game, right? They have 1,800, at least 1,800 different things people spend their houses on. Everything from cemetery plots to laundry detergent. Everything from video game downloads to canned corn. If you buy it in your household, it's probably in there. Has everybody got it? And then they use the weights. They look at the households overall, and they figure out how to weight the consumer price index. That's how they actually build it, okay? So what I'm going to show you is the detailed data that is available that tells you about what American households consume. So here's a typical example. Here's just a top-level blow at the income levels of the households, the number of consumer households. There's about 129 million households in the United States. They do it by household. They don't do it by person. They do it by household, okay? So the average household in America, $73,000 a year in terms of income. Income after taxes, $63,000. And then they tell you all about demographics. You can get all this information, right? But the other thing they provide you with, one of the things we want to think about is total expenditures on a particular type of service, like owning an automobile or mass transit services, but also the per unit cost, right? Like how much does it cost you per user? The other thing is it's nice to look at what percentage of households have a particular type of expending. Like for instance, everybody know about mass transit? So you guys are in New York City, right? What's the mass transit share in US right now? What percentage of US households go to work by mass transit? Anybody a number? Hey, give me a number. I think it's 8 or 9, I think. 8 or 9, okay? Okay, question. If you ask an average American if they have been on a fixed rail train type service, does anybody know where they've done it? No, wrong. They're all afraid of New York. Don't you know that? Don't you have friends who are afraid to come to New York? Don't everybody tell you it's dangerous to be here? No, they don't come to New York. They can't drive in New York. It's too expensive. No. Where have they been on a train? No, wrong, not DC. What? That is it, Disney World. Most Americans, if they've been on a subway or any sort of fixed rail, is at Disney World. Now, if that doesn't shock you, nothing will, okay? But the reality is, when we talk about mass transit, only about 10% of households have mass transit spending. So everybody got it? And I'll show it to you, right? Some households, gasoline, anybody? What percentage of U.S. households, I want to give you all my tidbits, but what? Any guesses? What percentage of U.S. households spend on gasoline? Up in the 90s. That's it. The answer is up in the 90s. But we'll see it, okay? Now, you can get individual services from things like the MTA. For instance, here's the MTA, okay? Does everybody see this? This is a correction. Of course, being the economist, I gave you the nominal spending on the price of a toll, right? This was a standard toll on a bridge in New York City. It's about $8.50. It's up to $9 now, right? $9 a trip. You go through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, cash user can pay 9 bills, right? Purple line is the nominal price. The blue line is the real price, adjusted for inflation. Has everybody got it? So I take the CPI, I divide the price by the CPI, and they got the real cost of the actual trip, right? So the real cost of a trip from 1968 to 2015 or so when I did this went from about 75 cents up to about $3.50 real, okay? I have the same chart for what? What's next? Come on, listen. What's this? This is your famous MTA fare, right? This is your fare. Now the fare is funky because when you try and do the fare correction, what? Got a lot of people use the monthly cards, yes or no, and you got to figure out how many trips they take on those cards and blah, blah, blah. This is your standard fare. Everybody got me? All sorts of discounts on top, okay? The fare went from about 75 cents up to about $1.50 real over the period of time, same period of time. If you compare the two in real terms, what? What? Tolls are up 3 times as much as transit fares. Why? I know, because people who drive are evil. And you need to punish them, correct? You need to find a way to punish them, and the way we're going to punish them is we're going to make them pay more. And then what? They will stop driving and be good people and take transit. Yes, that's the story. Am I right? Does this represent policy? How did this get? This is the same agency, am I right? Same budget, am I right? Yes? That's the money that funds the subway system and the toll bridges and all this jet, right? That's the MTA. It's the same entity. They're changing the relative prices, am I right, between the two services. Now, wait a second. Hold on. That's telling me that you're trying to discourage use of one service. As the economist, I would say what? You probably want to shift people away from driving and move them to transit, yes or no? There you go. That's what you're doing. Was this the way they actually stated it? There's all sorts of arguments. You'll have arguments of people hate, the environmental community hates driving. They want people to stop driving. I understand this. I understand this. The question is what happened to your user base? But that's the reality, okay? That's one single agency, one single pricing scheme. And you can see that there was a change in the relative prices between the two goods, okay? So now I go back to the Consumer Expenditure Survey and look at the actual consumption of goods and services. Now, I want to show you on the top line here. The top line up there is food. Does everybody see this? This is how much American households spend on food from 2006 to 2012. And what do you notice? Anybody? By the way, that's the total amount of money that American households, $821 billion Americans spent on food. Now, if you want to look at different pieces of the food, what? Drop yourself down the list because these are subcategories, all of it below it. Beef, you know, this is the average spending of a household in 2006 was $236 on beef. Now it's $226. They're shifting away from beef, apparently. Everybody got me? Top line number, though. Take a look at the top line number. 2006 was $6,111 on food. 2012 is what? $6,599. That's like up by like 6%. Does everybody got me? All right, okay. Now there's some inflation in there. Probably most of that increase is inflation, but I can pull it out. I got to go back and look again because every time I do this, every time I touch the data, I got to think up new things to look at because there's thousands and thousands of things to look at here. Basically, food, what? It's a bore fest. Has everybody got it? Which is the American household. You can look at the subcategories. Look at fresh fruits. People should eat more fresh fruits. 195, 261. They're eating some more, probably not that much more, okay? You know, you can go through beef, processed vegetables. You know, you can look at any different component. I'm going to talk to you about how they actually do this, but the reality is the households don't spend much more on food. Has everybody got it? That's an example of a stable consumption pattern, yes? Why? Anybody? Why is the consumption of food relatively stable? First of all, looking at high-level consumption, right, which is overall food, and everybody wants to eat, and we count the number of people, and we look at the per-use house, and pretty much everybody wants to eat similar amounts of food per day. That's just they're all the same biological creatures, so they're going to use about the same amount of food. Okay? Expenditures on top, how much they actually spend. I'm going to show you the detailed data of what's called the public use microsample. So the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, makes the data available for your download use as a consumer, as a researcher. You can download the raw data with a couple of caveat emptors, which is they do a few things to the data to kind of protect certain kinds of individuals that might be revealed through privacy issues. So everybody got it? So they have a few type of things. They call it top coding. They call it suppression, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to If you're going to do this, you have to get in there and look around. But this is the basic data. And I'm going to show you the transportation piece, okay? So this is what it looks like. There's two surveys at the BLS. One is a diary survey where they basically give you a diary and say, write down what you consumed. I went to the gas station, bought 4 gallons of gas, paid $12.85. I went to the store, bought a burrito, put down $2. Okay, the diary survey literally relies on the humans to write down in the book what they consumed. The other one is the interview survey, and I focus on the interview survey. The interview survey is they send somebody out to your house, and they sit with you, and they ask you questions. These are the questions. Everybody got it? This is just a couple of them. This is the transportation. Since the first of the reference month, not including this month, by the way, these are the craziest, badass way they do this, but this is how they talk to these people, right? What's your average monthly expense for gasoline service for all vehicles? Was there any expense? Okay, then they write the number down. $425. By the way, what did you spend last month on gasoline? Have you got a clue? I'll switch it. If you're New Yorkers, hold on. If you're New Yorkers, that's cheating. What did you spend last month on food? Got no clue. What? Because I don't remember. And if I asked you that number, you wouldn't know, right? Does everybody got it? Everybody, what do? They're taking a guess. They're taking a guess, right? But they do this consistently, okay? They ask, did you spend any money on diesel? Did you spend any money on oil for, this is the questions. They're all like this. They're all these questions over and over again asking about all your consumption. There's my question, okay? The first question I really went after was, did you spend any money on tolls or electronic toll passes? Everybody got it? That's the question. Yes or no? If you did, what? How much? Now, caveat emptor. Look at the question they asked. Because this is going to get funky. Because if you have a congestion charge, is it in this bucket? That's the only question they got on this. What about if you have a hot lane? What about if you have, other types of fees? The congestion zone. It's probably should go in there. Here's the other one. There's a taxi question. Is taxi Lyft? Is Uber taxi? Got it? Which relies on the households interpreting the questions. What I've been talking to BLS about is how they have to modify the questions. Has everybody got it? Because in the next 20 years, they may be confronted. This one works right now, but as we add, what about VMT charges? In here, yes or no? Now, I don't know, because the household probably should, VMT charge probably should be here, but will the household interpret if there's a VMT charge? California said they're putting it on the books. They're going to do it. The question's got to be right. Has everybody got it? So there are limitations here, but these questions are what they actually designed. Now, everything gets all reduced down to these codes. It's called the UCC codes, the Universal Classification Codes. These are all the categories of spending I can look at. And you'll notice in the transportation, what? A lot of stuff. Okay, I got GPS units. You want to rent an aircraft? There's renting an aircraft in there. There's your electronic tolls, parking fees. By the way, you notice this notation here? Does everybody see this? That means they only started the question in 2005, period 2, second month of the year, second quarter of the year. Has everybody got it? So if a new thing comes in, by the way, GPS only came in 2005. Things change. Where are these birds going to go? What is that? What are these birds? I don't even know what are they going to be? What are they? Rental scooter rental on the street. I don't even know. Is there a question? I'm not sure. Renting a bike. I don't know. Is it renting a bike? Not renting a bike. You're renting a scooter. I don't know. I don't know. So we'll find out. But with this, there's literally a couple hundred. You want to rent an aircraft? You want to rent a motorhome? There's all the different parking fees, tolls, GPS, vehicle insurance, auto repairs. All this stuff is in here. Okay. This is the new stuff. Yes. Households are spending a lot. Everybody know this one up on the left, right? What's that? That's Bolt Bus, right? Bolt Bus. What's that? Intercity bus, right? Intercity bus, right? And then the question is, how are people using it? Uber, Lyft, Uber Eats, right? Not sufficient that they move us around. Now they'll bring us our food. Zip car. All these things have to be captured because households spend money on it, right? So this is example. This is Uber. Everybody know this is Uber data. This is origins from Uber. This is from 10 to 14. Shows you how quickly these have been incorporated into household spending. So we've seen a lot of change here, and the transportation buckets look like they're actually moving quite a bit, and I'm going to show that to you now. So how do we look at this across income groups? How are we also going to be ready to measure new costs? Like I'm thinking about those stupid birds going, how are they going to do it? Okay, so let's take a look. So like Uber, everybody's seen this one? Todd Schneider did this one on Uber, which is really kind of cool, which is look at how much growth occurred in Uber in the last 10 years. Probably all of this should be in the taxi bucket, yes? Probably. Am I sure it is going to be there? No. But I'm going to tell you that there are some signals that it actually is. Oh, the other thing is the Americans are not buying cars, yes? You guys don't have that many cars, right? New Yorkers are like the lowest rate. Like New York City is 56% of the households don't have cars. But that's a challenge, right? Because if we're going to rely on the gas tax or we're going to use anything that's a fee-based service on automobiles, people are buying less automobiles. And then we're going to have autonomous vehicles, right? And then we're going to have services, right? The U.S. average, 9.22% of households are non-car households. So you can see how different New York City is from all the other parts of the country, right? So we got a lot of stuff going on out there. We got private automobile, we got shared vehicle, carpool, fan pool. Everybody know that one, right? Fan pool is just your family traveling around together. Then shared things like jitney, taxi, scooters, walking bike, transit, mass transit. Then there's a lot of stuff going on in the non-travel bucket, which I think we as transportation people have to think about. I don't go to the store that much anymore. As a matter of fact, I avoid the mall like the plague. How do I handle my consumption? Do I still consume goods and services? Yes, what do? I'm on Amazon, yes or no, right? And I get it all the time. One of my frustrations is when I go out to actually shop, first of all, that's 2 trips, one out and one back, right? And I have a consulting rate. Like I have a consulting rate, for my own work. And every time I'm driving to the store, I'm thinking I could be home working and making money, like why am I doing this? I'll just go online and order this stuff and stuff gets brought to me. So that could change how people actually live, right? Like instead of going out to used to go out to the DVD store. Everybody remember this? You go out and rent the DVD. Does anybody do that now? Nobody in the room is doing this, right? By the way, in the BLS data, it has renting DVDs, okay? Got it? So you can, again, that's gone. Why? Because we're on Netflix, we get iTunes, right? Go to a restaurant for a meal. Does anybody do that still? That you still do. Buy a physical map, like actually have a map in your car, or do you just have a GPS phone and you rely on that? By the way, be careful about that one. Does everybody know the phenomena called death by GPS? Which is what? People trust GPS so freaking much right now that they actually will drive off cliffs and stuff. Like they'll just go out into the desert. I've seen it, by the way, in South Jersey. I've seen people out in the Pine Barrens. They're driving through the forest and they have no clue where they are and they're just following their GPS.
It happens a lot. People go stuck on their GPS. It's very dangerous.
It relies on the fact that you have a good base map and the navigation system work. But in New Jersey, look, you don't have to go to Rio, okay? You can go to New Jersey. In New Jersey, in the south part of New Jersey, there's a lot of dirt roads that are according to GPS roads. And they route people. Like I was out in the middle of the forest in my Jeep, right? And these old people driving by in a car, like looking like they're looking out the windows like, oh my God. Yeah, they were going right in the middle of hell. But the GPS was saying go, and they were going, go.
The funniest thing to see is a New Yorker or a tourist on 5th Avenue and 42nd Street to go into the GPS to find out where the library is. They don't observe anymore.
No. By the way, GPS is fascinating. There's a lot of stuff about what's going on in terms of cognition because GPS on purpose, like I get frustrated with GPS because it wants to deprive me of all navigation. It wants to give me turn by turn. And it doesn't want to tell me, and this is where you are. There's none of that anymore. It's all completely that. Zipcar, Lyft, Uber, you don't have to have your own car. Go to meetings, Skype, we were talking about this before. People don't go to meetings anymore. I came here today, but in a lot of cases you just Skype each other. Hey, I'll just come by, 10 years I'll come by virtual reality, right? You'll have a hologram of me and I'll be here holographically. Some of the stuff gets bundled together with transportation and it also shifts stuff around in the boxes, so you should know that, okay? So again, the first thing we did, we looked at tolling, and if you want to read about this, we have a whole paper on it called For Whom the Consumer Price Index Tolls. We identified, according to our estimates, that the BLS data is missing about 1/3 of the spending on tolls. And we think it's because households forget they spent the money, which is important because in the way that they actually structure the survey, any non-spending falls to the last line in the survey. Does anybody know what the last line is? The last line is savings. So if you forget you spent money, the BLS assumes you saved it. So part of the reason we think people forget is because electronic tolling. And the people don't know they paid, and they forget the numbers. So we have identified about 1/3, but you can read that if you want. All right, so that's the survey. That's the question.
What's the Port Authority toll on EasyPass? I couldn't even tell you. I know it's 15 cash.
Yeah, it's 15 cash. The other thing is that we get into a lot of issues about payers, non-payers, cash versus user, non-cash users. It's very varied. And by the way, there's a dirty little secret. Does anybody know the income strata of cash payers versus EasyPass payers? Who's richer? Generally, easy pass payers are wealthier than the cash payer, which means, of course, that it's a regressive form of structure in your current system, but nobody, just shh, don't talk about it, because you talk about these things, it gets ugly. Sometimes they bundle up the stuff, the UCC codes, like this is the vehicle, general vehicle expenditures, they bundle them together. I'm going to show you deep, taken apart stuff, okay, very low level detail, but some of the stuff is available like in summary level, okay? So for instance, mass transit fares fall into this bucket called other public transportation. That includes your local mass transit fares, taxi fares, intercity train fares, all that stuff falls into one bucket. You have to pull it apart at the UCC level, and I'm going to show you real detailed stuff, okay? So we've done, the second work we did was on environmental justice, social equity, income differences, okay? And then you'll get that detail if you want to look at it. This is just overall households. What's really kind of interesting is how much they're changing. And this is 2015 here, okay, and 2005 here. What you'll notice is, let's take a look at taxis. If you want to talk to me afterwards, I'll tell you how you do it. You can count the number of people who have the consumption expenditure. You can also count how much they spend. You can also count how many people don't have the consumption expenditure. Got it? Because the average of all households masks the fact that the households that actually pay the fee may be paying a pretty significant amount of money. Has everybody got it? So I'm going to show you the number of people who pay, and I'm also going to show you their spending versus the average. So for instance here, in taxi cabs, in 2005, 3.3% of households actually had taxi cab usage. By 2015, it's up to 5%. That's a pretty big change in a very short period of time. Everybody got that? What is it? Do we have to hit it? Okay. Gasoline, by the way. Look at gasoline. Borefest. 89% of households spent for gasoline in 2005, 88.6%. Basically, household consumption of gasoline stayed the same over the whole period. Taxis went up dramatically. The other thing is you can look at how much they spent, okay? So there's somebody who's a user, how much they spent on all these different services, and this is the percentage of households that have a user, okay? Has everybody got it? So again, if you look at something like tolls, average household by a user, 9 bills, went up to 23 bills in 2015, which is a rather significant increase in spending. And that's across all users. Everybody got it? That's a big number difference, okay? So things like taxis, parking, and tolls are all up rather dramatically, okay? Mass transit's kind of interesting because mass transit, 9.4% of households in 2005 had the spending category, 10.6, a mild increase in the number of people taking mass transit, right? Which follows with what we've seen. The amount spent went from 45 to 73, which meant that the cost per ride went up, okay? So more users, but mostly more fee paying. Okay, so what do we find? Growth in spending categories, spending on tolls doubled between 25 and 15. Taxi went up by 50%, although fares paid declined. I want to look at that again, okay? Fares paid on a per person basis, right? Where's taxis? 3.3, 40 bucks, right? 40.10. Oh, it only went up a little bit, 40.88. Almost no increase. So we think the actual fare per event was crushed, and we're thinking that maybe Lyft and Uber cutting back on the cost of the ride, okay? And paid parking increased. Okay, by the way, if you've ever wanted to study the 1%, because the 1% gets a lot of play, yes or no, right? The top 1% in the data is the top 1%. They have super wealthy households. This is their consumption pattern for super wealthy households, okay? And you can look at this. Oh, by the way, this is really fascinating. Gasoline spending, 2018. The average household in America spent 191 bucks on gasoline. The average 1%er spent how much on gasoline? $293, $289. So the rich people do buy more gasoline, but what? Not much more. These guys here, if I look at the income, I think the income is 180, 200,000 bills, something like that north, okay? Got it? So the 1% is way up there, okay? They're spending a little bit of their money on gasoline taxes. So they love gasoline taxes as a source of funding. Why? Because they don't pay that much more. They're about 1.5 times the average household. By the way, the poor households in America, you want to hear the nasty story? What? They spend like $160 a month. Got it? So the super wealthy buy more gasoline, but very little more gasoline, okay? All right, so then the top 1%, they spent more money on all categories except gasoline and large increases in tolls and taxi. We think they may be using it because they enjoy it. Okay. I can split the data now by cities. The major cities actually have the data too. And I can show you the spending categories by major cities. These are about 18 major cities in the United States where you can look at spending on tolls. Here's spending on tolls by area. Very, very wide variation, okay? With the all household average, all households, again, New York, New Jersey at 12, Minneapolis at 23 cents a household because they don't have many tolls out there. Phoenix, by the way, what? Nothing, okay? San Francisco, high amount of spending too. But again, quite a bit of variation in that kind of spending. Very few households have it in America. Most households don't pay tolls. By the way, the percent of households with the expense, Boston, 39%, New York, 29%, Philadelphia, 30%, city like Minneapolis, 3% of households only pay tolls. Detroit, 3%. Atlanta, 1%. And what? Riverside, San Bernardino, 7%. So quite a bit of variation. Gasoline, everybody buys. Tolling, very uneven, okay? We have all the maps of this. You can look at that later to enjoy the differences in variation between the major cities. And then taxi services. What's really fascinating about the taxi services is the percentage of usage between 2006 and 2016. Here, the percentage of households that had taxi services. The big number back in 2006 was 11% for New York City, up to 16% today. But look at your cities like Minneapolis. Minneapolis had 1% of the households with spending on taxis, 4 cents on the average household of spending, up now to 14%. And we think that we're seeing the Uber in the data. The Uber, the Lyft, the car share services, rising dramatically in the households over this period of time, okay? A lot of households, a lot of cities with very low numbers here, 0, 1, 2, up to 14, 15%. We think that's all the rideshare stuff, okay? So here's the actual taxi usage. This is the percentage of change of households with the expense, and you notice some areas like, again, here up in Atlanta, up dramatically in terms of the amount of usage of those types of services, okay? Here is mass transit, because everybody in New York City is fascinated with mass transit, but of course on a national level, what? There's your number, by the way. Here's your number. Percent mass transit user right there. If you want to know the numbers, here's the big gun. New York, New Jersey at 43%, right? The people who live outside the cities, look at their number, percent of people who use mass transit. 3.7% of Americans who live outside these major 18 cities use mass transit. Practically nobody. By the way, this is a great lesson in politics. Because when you go, by the way, does anybody know, the MTA in trouble, right? The MTA is financially frail, am I right? Does anybody know what the transit advocates say we should fix? How should we fix the transit problem? How should we fix the MTA shortfall of revenue? How are we going to do it? The MTA loses like $4 million a day. Does everybody know this? They give away 7 million rides. They lose about 60, 70 cents a ride. How are we going to fix the MTA's financial trouble? Does anybody know what the transit advocates tell me? That's one. Let's charge ourselves. But the other one they love is, everybody know this? The one they love? This is the one they love. Let's go to Washington and ask for more money. Okay? You see this number right here? Where is it? I got to find it. See that number right there? Here. That number right there is why going to Washington is not so good. So everybody got it? Most of your senators are in that kind of a number. So when you say go to Washington, give me more money, because 43% of my people in my district use mass transit, you go there and say, give me more money. They look at you and go like, but like nobody in my district uses mass transit. If they do, what kind of transit do they have? Anybody know? Nationally, what's the main source of mass transit? Buses. So therefore, you show up and say, give me another $4 billion to build another subway line, and they look at you like you're crazy. Welcome to the team. So everybody got it? So this data tells you a lot about the differences between the cities, and there's a massive variation. Look at Phoenix Mesa has a percent mass transit of 2.6%. 2.6% versus New York at 43. That's New York Metro, by the way. That's not New York City. That's New York, New Jersey, you know, okay? So again, you can look at the data there on spending changes, and then also, obviously, the amount of consumption. You can study also the major metropolitan areas. Here I broke by race. I can study consumption expenditures of Hispanic households as compared to Anglo households, as compared to Asian households, as compared to African-American households. The lines I gave you here are just to make it easy. Yellow is Anglos. Tan on this screen is Hispanics. Blacks are in the blue color, and the Asians are in the tan or this brownish color, okay? That's just to make it easier. Non-urban dwellers, major city dwellers. Everybody got it? Consumption pattern here of gasoline, okay? What's really funky when you do this one is a couple things pop out. First of all, same racial breaks. Income between people who live in cities versus the non-cities. Here's your white Hispanics. Notice the discrepancy in income. The people living in the cities make more money in general, by a wide margin in a lot of cases. The whites, non-Hispanics, 99,000 living in cities, 69,000 living outside the 18 cities, $30,000 difference. Oh, by the way, car ownership over here, which they have actually reported car ownership in the data, what you'll notice is, in general, people who live in the cities have less cars than people who live in the rural areas. And this is exactly why when you try to have national transportation policy, what? It's hard to get everybody on the same page because the regions are different. And by the way, the racial breakdowns are different too. I was astounded, by the way, when I saw this. I just pulled this last couple weeks ago. I was astounded by that number, how big a delta it was. The urban people are wealthier than the rural people, right? People in the non-PSU areas, the non-major cities, are actually much, much less income, okay? So why use the Consumer Expenditure Survey? I'm getting close to time, so I'll just go through it a little bit. Key thing about it, it has income and consumption. So when you want to study those problems in society, you have both the income measures and you have the consumption measures. You also have longitudinal data. They've been collecting this data since 1996. So when you walk up to it, you have 30 years worth of data already in place. Everybody got it? The data is well organized and documented. They actually have professional statisticians. Like I work with some people who do like app stuff and they make me crazy because I've been in data for a long time, right? The BLS is organized. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. All the data is pretty well organized and documented. They have big documentation handouts that actually you can read. Various aspects of household lifestyle, has geographic location, and it gives you various consumption goods in the same household. So I could study Uber and gasoline in the same household. So everybody got me? So that's where it's interesting. The other thing you do, there's lots of different cuts demographically. PSU, I already showed you, state, income group, age, education, gender, race, and I can study all these patterns over time. I don't know of any other source that's similar to this for research purposes. Here's a couple of big guns that we looked at, all the different ones, the taxi services, right? And one of the things we actually looked at, I write all my own code for this, you know, and actually then I can pull things out like gasoline. And actually, by the way, I can take the data by income break. Here's my classic deciles. And with that, you can actually create this, which is anybody? What's that? That's a Lorenz curve. That allows you to look at the income distribution of the payers versus the non-payers and look at the household income distribution. This is what leads to the Gini coefficient, which is the measure of income inequality. Data has the ability to do that. And they've been writing now about the generations, which is interesting too, because you guys are young relative to me, okay, generally, and you guys are consuming differently than we are. And I'll cut back to that. I don't want to go through all the data, but Geoffrey Paulin at the BLS has some really good, interesting writing on this. I just want to show you this. Okay, does everybody know the demographic breaks in the United States? That's the breaks, right? You have the baby boomers and the silent generation. What's happening to the silent generation and the Gen X, and the greatest generation? They're dying, they're out, okay? And over here, we're filling in with the millennials and they have a new name for them. What are they, Gen Zs or something like that, okay? You guys have different patterns of consumption than the old people, okay? So what we did is I created a generational variable. So everybody got it? I clumped the data by age of household into different breaks, putting them in, and then you can do is you can then rattle through the data and actually look at household consumption by type of service, okay? So look at the young people, old people, look at all the different income breaks. I have tons of different stuff. One of the things that's interesting in the data is you can see as people get older, what? They change their pattern. What happens to income generally as you get older? Anybody? It goes like this. Everybody, the income is like this and then like this. Everybody got it? Things like automobiles peak, but you guys are not buying as many automobiles. Your automobile counts are lower than the generation ahead of you. The baby boomers are buying more, have more automobiles. Now, as they get older, what? They discard the automobiles because they may not want to drive anymore. But generally, there's differences in consumption patterns, and I can go through all the details. Here's paid parking, okay? Here's out-of-town use on taxis. which didn't change very much, by the way. But local taxis, of course, probably captures Uber. Big changes between 2005, again, 3% of households using taxi services in 2005 versus 5% today with the millennials, what? Up dramatically, okay? So gasoline consumption, all the different categories we can look at by race, gender. So there's lots of places to study. There's lots of good stuff that you could work with this data. I would strongly encourage you, if you're interested in demographics and in household consumption, that this is a nice place for you to start working. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is very excited. I'm not a representative of them, but I've worked with them for about the last 6 years. They're very excited that you would be involved and interested, by the way, because they have this source of data and they think it's great and they think it has some really interesting opportunities. So it's something to think about. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Go, please.
First of all, thanks for inviting me here. I got it because I went to a seminar back in October.
Yeah.
Two-day seminar. And so the first question I have is, why do they use averages instead of medians? Because averages are so average. Number two,
Yeah.
all these fees, why don't they talk about the elephant in the room, which is regressive taxation, and not go to something more progressive? And number three, what about time? We're told that time is money.
Right.
So in New York City, I live in the 70s on the west side. If I want to go to 42nd Street, I have two choices. I can take a subway, 72nd Street, express, 3 minutes.
Yep.
Or I can take a bus down Columbus or Broadway,
Yeah.
45 minutes.
Right.
So why would anyone want to travel by anything but fixed rail, rapid transit?
First, there's a lot of questions here. I got a lot of questions. Okay, so I got to dig into them one by one. First of all, I use means. BLS does use means.
The means and average are more or less the same.
Right, I know this, but I'm saying you're asking for median, right? I could pull median. How? The thing is that gets interesting is that for something like tolls, only 10% of households have the consumption pattern. So there is an argument for looking at the two distinct. By the way, the methodology I showed you today is my methodology. The BLS and I have some back and forth discussions because they report the averages, and I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. When you have something where only 10% of the households, again, taxis are used by a relatively small fragment of the American society. So when you're talking about consumption patterns and taxis, it's a lot more interesting to talk about those people who use the service. Again, 700 people out of the 7,000 would use that service versus just reporting the national average, right? I think it's interesting to look at how Minnesota went from 1 or 2% of households to suddenly 5, 10, 8% of households using taxi services in a very short period of time. So there's lots of ways to look at the data. Literally, it's record by record, household by household, so you could dig in and put together any sort of construct. I like to break into deciles on the income to see that kind of pattern. I like to see how differences are. On the second one, well, who's going to pay for all that infrastructure you want? I agree with you. Households would prefer high-quality infrastructure. Buses are not as good as fixed rail. But then you got to talk about the funding mechanism, right?
We used to have a progressive income tax.
Okay. Yeah. No. Listen. If you read my paper on tolling, I'll talk a lot about regressivity, and I've done a lot of work on social justice and equity. And absolutely, when you see me pulling out the Lorenz curve, that's the secret signal. What? Okay, so I did work. If you guys have read have you guys read the Regional Transportation Plan? I was a consultant for the NIMTIC on the Regional Transportation Plan on the financing. Okay, so they asked me, how can we pay for all this infrastructure? What was my first answer to MTA or to NIMTIC? Anybody know the first answer I gave them? First answer I said was legalize marijuana, and that went over how well? Anybody know how much money it would be worth? It would be worth about $5 billion. Would solve all the problems, one tax, done.
But no one would travel.
Pot for the, wait, I had slogans for it. I had slogans for it. Pot for the potholes, smoke a J and ride the subway, man. We had everything. We were all set.
That was a line in pre-med.
So listen. That was a no starter. So then I said, one of my solutions was, ready for this? Tax the rich. Now, what is the first question that comes up when you say tax the rich? Do a regressive, go after a progressive tax. Tax the rich. I was going to put a 3% surcharge on incomes above. Anybody know the answer?
$1 million.
See, that's the problem. As soon as you bring up the answer, everybody says about $50,000 above me. Has everybody got it? Because I only have one house in the Hamptons. So I need to have a tax that really hits the rich people. And they're $1.5 million. You know, I'm getting by. I got a little cottage in the Hamptons. I don't have a big house. You know, the guy with the big, he's rich. I did 250 north. Okay? And everybody, as soon as you said 250,000 in north, right? What did they say? I was going to put a 3% surcharge on income above 250,000. And what happens? Who shows up to yell? First of all, they don't even want to talk about it because it's like, oh, it's terrible to even talk about taxing the rich people. I believe in the Willie Sutton rule of taxation. Willie Sutton was a bank robber who asked the question, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. That's exactly right. So I like to go after the wealthy people. Why? Because I shake them what? I shake you guys. I'm going to take a couple of quarters and a nickel and some lint. No good, no good. I'm going to shake the big guy. Okay. I went after, right? So then what we did is you had to query the data to find the rich people. Can I find the rich people? Yes, I can. I'm a good squirrel, okay? I'm a very good research squirrel, and I can find you the rich people, okay? And I can tell you how the methodology. But I went to the Census Bureau because, again, some of this disguising of incomes, they tend to not report all the money that the super rich people have because it's really skewed, you know? There's a lot of money up there. I have a way of finding it, and I found it. And I went to the Census Bureau, and I showed them my methodology, and they went, oh, that'll work. So I know where they are. I queried the zip codes in New York State where the most super rich people lived. You want me to give you the names? It's terrible places like Chappaqua, New York, and like, you know, Garden City, Long Island, and like, you know, you know the names, the Westchester, the Upper East Side, you know, and oh, the downtown Brooklyn, right around us. Oh, there's some nice numbers here. I could easily find you multiple millions of dollars by taxing the super rich. What's the problem? By the way, most of them, of the 30 highest income zip codes in New York State, how many of them were in New York Metro? Because it's NIMTIC, right? We're raising funds for the subway. We can't tax the people in Rochester or Albany. How many of the 30 were in New York City Metro? 29. One was outside the district. I'm like, there you go, I'm done. Nope. Why? Well, I don't know. You guys want to tax the rich? One of the problems in America, they say, is everybody thinks they're going to be rich. So they don't want to tax the rich because they say eventually it's going to hit me. No. It's policy, public policy. It's power, will.
What about the commuter tax?
That's another famous one, by the way. That's another famous. Here's another one, right?
People will use
Senator Russell Long said it best. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the fellow behind the tree. The rule is you try to figure out a way to tax other people, tourists, non-residents, people who don't use the system, blah, 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 blah. No, somebody's got to pay.
But I'm saying,
Somebody's got to pay.
Well, why do you have to tax anyone?
What?
Why do you have to tax anyone?
Well, go to a user fee model, right? We just say we pay?
No. I mean, just pay the way you pay for defense.
No, right, no.
I mean, how they're paying for the defense? This is 60% of the budget.
Right, no, they just take it out of general fund, right? The general levy.
Borrow the money.
I'm a fan of the general levy. I'm a fan of taking money out of the general levy. I'm telling you that I'm being confronted by the public policy people to say, find extra sources of money. I don't want to raise the gas tax. I don't want to raise income taxes. My first answer would be legalize marijuana. My second answer would be raise the income tax. But once they run out of that, by the way, I had to come up with things. Go read the NIMTIC report. I said auction parking spaces. No. Why? See, at first I thought you'd auction parking spaces and you'd raise money for, like, UPS would pay, you know what I mean, to have parking spaces dedicated to them. But then I found out about Madonna. Does anybody know about Madonna? Madonna has an Upper East Side townhouse, and she hates people parking in front of her house. So I'd let Madonna buy her parking space in front of her house. Go for it. Question, how much would Madonna pay? I don't know. Maybe the paparazzi would pay $80,000 a year to have that space. Maybe they pay more. That was one of the solutions. Again, there's plenty of solutions of how to raise revenue, but you got to get through the political process. This is what we're doing. There's lots of stuff going on. There's lots of changes going on in the household budgets. There's lots of things going on in terms of what people consume. So when you start to talk about taxation, don't be surprised if you use a shift away.
what about the time factor?
What?
Time is money.
You look at commuter rail. Commuter rail in New York Metro moves at about 45 or 50 miles an hour. If you get yourself on the number 2 train, how fast are you moving?
35.
According to the schedule, because you got to go to Staten. 9 miles an hour on average. Say from Brooklyn. Yeah, go take a look at the schedule. Look at the time of travel and the distance from, say, Brooklyn College to Midtown.
Talking about
Oh, speed of the vehicle. The vehicle's fast. No, but no, stops like this all the time. Versus you go from Hicksville, Long Island, on the Long Island Railroad to you're going to go at 40 miles an hour on average. The vehicle's doing about 70 or 80 on the Long Island Railroad. But again, should users pay more for better quality service? This is a really good question. Should bus fares be different than subway fares? It's a good question. But again, if I tell you, when you look at the actual detailed demographic differences, you get some really ugly stories in this game. Like low-income households still buy a lot of gasoline, a lot of gasoline. The number of low-income households, I didn't focus on it here today, the number of low-income households who have cars is astounding. And that's a huge financial burden to those households. You know, so when we think about our policies, you really should think about the fact that different types of user classes are going to be.
Because they're in transportation deserts.
That's it. They're done. I mean, if you're Dave King's new recent work came out. He said having a car is as valuable in most cities as having a college degree. The difference in your quality of job opportunities is as great owning a car versus not owning a car as having a college degree versus not having a college degree. We run around in circles talking about how important it is for people to get an education. I would say a beater is probably one of the biggest sources of economic mobility. But again, you look at the consumption patterns. Gasoline is very, very, we talk about raising the gas tax. That's one of the things we're pushing on. Very, very aggressive. Low-income households pay a lot of money in gas. And the rich households, by the way, love it. Why? Look at the numbers I showed you. They only spend $389 a month versus the low-income house, $160. They only double, but their income is like 15 times. You know, it's a lot of fun, a lot of interesting work. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Guys want to email me anytime.